This is the video operator speaking, Douglas Schubner, for Action Legal Video, 132 Nassau Street, New York, New York. We are here on this day, April 15th, 1997, 9 o'clock a.m., and at the time continuously recorded on the videotape at the offices of Jones Day, 599 Lexington Avenue, New York, New York. To take the video deposition, Dr. Alexander Spires, on behalf of the defense in the matter of Norma Broyne et al. Versus Philip Morris Companies, Inc. et al. in the Circuit Court of the 11th Judicial Circuit in and for Dade County, Florida, case number 94-08273, CA. Witness may be sworn in. Counsels may introduce themselves. I'm sorry.
Stanley and Susan Rosenblatt in behalf of the plaintiffs.
David Hardy on behalf of Lorillard.
David Ross on behalf of Lorillard.
James Wilson for Lorillard.
Dennis Reynolds for Counsel Tobacco.
Ed Moss, BMW.
Mike Russ, Brown Williamson.
Alan Mansfield, Lorillard. Robert Gaffey, Reynolds.
Marie Tanacroce for Brooklyn Wiggett.
Sir, raise your right hand for me, please. Swear testimony about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please tell us your name and your business address.
Alexander White Spears III. Business address is 2525 East Market Street, Greensboro, North Carolina. 27420.
By whom are you employed?
Lorillard Tobacco Company.
In what capacity?
I'm chairman and chief executive officer.
And how long have you occupied those dual positions?
About a year and a half.
What was your job title immediately before assuming the dual positions?
Vice chairman and chief operating officer.
Who was the chairman when you were vice chairman?
Andrew Tisch.
What, if any, is Andrew Tisch's present relationship with Lorillard Tobacco Company?
He doesn't have a direct relationship. He has a position with Lowe's Corporation.
And what is the relationship between Lowe's Corporation and Lorillard Tobacco Company?
Lorillard Tobacco is a subsidiary.
Is Lorillard Tobacco Company a wholly owned subsidiary of Lowe's Corporation?
Yes, it is.
Okay. How long have you been with Lorillard?
Since 1959.
What is Lorillard's most popular brand?
Newport.
Do you have discount brands?
Yes, we do.
How many?
We have 3 discount brands.
And what are their names?
Maverick, Old Gold, and Style.
What is the price differential, the present price differential between the discount brands and, let's say, Newport?
At retail?
Yes.
Well, I would say around 40 cents a pack.
What does Newport sell at retail? Well, I'm sure it varies from place to place, but give me the general range.
Depends on the tax, but I think the sales weighted average is about $1.85.
What's after Newport? What's the second most popular brand?
Of Lorillard?
Of Lorillard.
Kent.
Okay. How many billions of cigarettes does Lorillard sell in a year?
Last year, 40.9 billion.
What is tar?
Well, tar is is defined by a process of measurement, and that is that the cigarette is smoked under standard conditions. Standard conditions being 35 cc puffs of 2-second duration at a frequency of once every 58 seconds. The the cigarettes are smoked to a butt length of tipping paper plus 3 millimeters. If they're filter cigarettes, if they're non-filter cigarettes, it's 23 millimeters. With that smoking procedure, the cigarette smoke is collected on a specified filter. That filter is weighed. It's analyzed for its water content and its nicotine content. And so these weights are subtracted.
Had we gotten the last question? Okay. It's all right. I think I had asked them which brand was highest in tar, and I think you were responding to that.
Yes,
Okay, we're on tape now? Okay. Which Lorillard brand is highest in tar and which Lorillard brand is lowest in tar?
Each brand is made up of a number of different packings, and the different packings, for example, a regular Newport has one value, a 100 millimeter Newport lengthwise would have a different value. A lights version would have a different value, so it depends on which packing you're referring to.
Well, I need you to tell me. I'm just trying to find out which packing, which brand is highest in tar, which is lowest.
Well, I don't have the numbers exactly in mind, but I would say the 100 millimeter versions of Newport and Old Gold.
Which Lorillard brands are lowest in tar?
Well, the so-called lights or ultralights would be the lowest, and there would be the shorter versions of True, Kent, Tree, Triumph would be the lowest, and I think they're all about the same.
If you put the lowest brand of True up against the highest brand of Newport, speaking of tar, does that mean that True is less hazardous to the smoker's health than Newport?
No, I wouldn't say that.
What is the significance? Okay, Dr. Spears, the court reporter is going to read my last question before we had a problem with the video.
What is the significance to the consumer from a purely health standpoint of getting a low-tar cigarette over a high-tar cigarette?
Object to the form of the question.
I don't know that I can say there is a difference in terms of the cigarettes. It would also depend on how an individual smoked the cigarette in terms of the amount of tar that the individual would get from the cigarette. So there would be a lot of factors that would go into any determination as to the amount of tar and amount of smoke an individual would receive. Other than that, to me, that is a difference that the consumer would perceive, and I don't know that that does relate to any health consequence.
So as I'm understanding you, whether the smoker gets a lot of tar, just to put it generically, a lot of tar or a very small amount of tar, as far as you know, there are no health consequences either to a lot or to a little.
That's basically correct. It's obvious, however, that if one postulated a health consequence, that if there was a lesser dose or a lesser amount, one would extrapolate that to be a a lesser impact on the individual.
But that would be in the area of speculation as far as you're concerned.
It would be the same as smoking more or less cigarettes.
Now, I'm referring to you as doctor, having seen your curriculum vitae. You are not a medical doctor, correct?
That's correct.
You have a PhD in what?
In chemistry.
What is your definition of marketing?
My definition of marketing is advertising, promotion, overall strategy for the sale, resulting in the sale of cigarettes in this case.
You know, is it fair to say, and obviously this is oversimplified, but what would go under the umbrella of marketing would be all those strategies which would be designed to convince the consumer, for example, to smoke Newport rather than Marlboro.
That's basically correct, yes.
Okay. And obviously, if you were successful in doing that, that would reflect very successful marketing of a product.
That would be regarded as successful, yes.
Do you attribute the rather fantastic success of Marlboro to its marketing of that product, or do you attribute that success to superior tobacco, or what?
I think its success is due to a number of factors. I think it's very difficult to quantitate the importance of any one, or to even separate them in that respect. Success is obviously related to their advertising. It's related to their promotion and marketing. In that sense, it's related to the quality of the product, consumer acceptance of the product. It's related to availability in terms of distribution. All of these factors play a role.
How long has Marlboro been the leading seller among cigarettes in America, and I'm sure the world?
Those may be different answers, I'm not sure, but I
Let's
would
talk
say
about America.
in America, probably late 70s, early 80s.
What percentage of the market does Marlboro have?
Say about 25% or so.
Which brand of cigarettes is number 2?
Newport.
So your leading brand is the number 2 brand in America, Newport.
But a very distant second. Yeah.
What percentage of the market do you have?
About 6.5%.
And what brand is number 3?
I'm not 100% sure, but possibly Winston.
Are the warnings on your products
Returning to the record, 9:34.
Dr. Spears, I think immediately before there was a problem with the video, I had asked you if the warnings on your packages of cigarettes are true and accurate.
I think that's a difficult question to ask. The warnings represent conclusions which I am not in agreement with. On the other hand, I can't say that they're false.
Okay, one of the warnings says, Surgeon General's warning, smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and may complicate pregnancy. And does that warning fall in the category you've just described? You don't agree with it, but on the other hand, you can't say it's false.
That's correct.
There's at least one warning you agree with, isn't there? Totally.
Which warning?
Cigarette smoke contains carbon monoxide.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay. Quitting smoking now greatly reduces serious risks to your health. You agree with that one?
Well, the same answer to the first, yeah.
Okay. You don't agree with it, but you can say it's false.
That's correct.
Smoking by pregnant women may result in fetal injury, premature birth, and low birth weight. That falls in the same category.
It says it may. I mean, I think anything's a possibility. I don't agree that the warning represents a finding that it does.
Would Lorillard carry any warnings on its packages of cigarettes if it was not required to do so?
That's a difficult question. I think if we felt, and I do feel, that the consumer is adequately informed regarding information that exists regarding smoking, I would probably say the warnings would be redundant. On the other hand, if the feeling was that the consumers were unaware of information that exists, then perhaps warnings would be appropriate.
You know, okay, I've heard your answer. You know, you're the president and CEO of Lorillard, a major tobacco company in this country. And what I'm asking you is, what direction, if any, would you give if you had the choice? No warnings are required, and you were called upon to make a decision, well, should we say anything to the consumer relating to health on a purely voluntary basis? What would your recommendation be? And obviously your recommendation would be followed.
I'm going to object to the form of the question. Mr. Rosenblatt, only because I don't think it's clear from your question whether you're hypothesizing a situation where no warning has ever been on, and now would they put one on, or are you hypothesizing a situation where, in spite of the fact that a warning's been on for 31 years, all of a sudden the requirement is lifted?
The latter. My hypothesis is the latter. Tomorrow morning, Congress says to Lorillard and Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds and Brown and Williamson, and you don't have to put these warnings on anymore. Whether you put warnings on is entirely up to you. That's my hypothesis.
Well,
if that were the circumstance, would your products have warnings or wouldn't they? And if they would have warnings, what would they say?
Well, I would want to know why Congress was taking that position. Was it based on new scientific information? It depends on the reason they were making that statement. If there was some new information that said diseases were caused by some other agent and cigarettes were exonerated, then I'd probably say take the warnings off. If it were a continuation of the present scientific environment, I think I would leave the warnings on. It depends on the circumstances.
In an earlier answer, you referred to a concept of the public being adequately informed about health risks.
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me explore that with you a little. Let's say there's a smoker who starts studying what the tobacco executives have said over the years about smoking and health. And he looks at the congressional testimony, and he looks at some depositions, and he looks in press reports, and basically he hears from the CEOs and presidents of the various tobacco companies on the question of cause. We don't think cause has been scientifically proven. Maybe my product causes lung cancer, but on the other hand, maybe it doesn't. Now, if that's the bottom line, maybe it does and maybe it doesn't, how isn't the consumer confused as opposed to being adequately informed?
I don't think that's confusing. Obviously, what's being said is that there is information that bears on whether or not smoking causes disease. That information has been conveyed to the consumers in the newspaper, by the Surgeon General, by the warning notices. Tremendous amount of information being supplied to the consumer, all of which is negative with respect to smoking, from a public health point of view, from that kind of perspective, which is to err on the side of caution. The other statements being made is that we don't believe that there is a scientific proof to these diseases, which are basically lifetime diseases that have multiple etiologies, obviously. The mechanisms of diseases are not known. There are some critical missing elements in a proof. It's not there, and those are the statements that I have made. I don't think that's to suggest that the consumer is not aware of the tremendous amount of negative publicity that's been portrayed by basically our government and media.
You would agree, would you not, that you said basically that all the information is negative, pretty much with the exception of what the tobacco industry said, correct? On health and smoking.
In terms of public statements, I think that's correct.
Okay. You would agree, would you not, and I don't mean there's necessarily 100% consensus, but you would agree there is a medical and scientific consensus, and has been for a number of years, that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, don't you?
I think there is a consensus among the group that I would identify as public health and the anti-smoking industry, which are dedicated individuals who are paid, I guess, to basically campaign against tobacco and tobacco use.
Well, if you were to recite every national organization, the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, the American Medical Association, basically every official entity in the United States representing physicians has taken a public position, and this is what I meant by consensus, that cigarette smoking causes cancer. Or can you name one mainstream medical organization that has taken the tobacco position that, you know, maybe it does and maybe it doesn't?
No, but I wouldn't expect the public health group to take any position. When it's a maybe situation, they will always take the warning situation that it is, in that they will tend to always try to err on the side of public health. Well, so that's a natural phenomenon. Now, if you look at the other side of the question, I think there are certainly scientists within the tobacco industry and scientists who have conducted research for the tobacco industry who have not expressed that opinion. Their opinions, particularly those independent investigators, I think they've become more cautious because of the position that some of the public health organizations have taken with respect to preventing their publication if they're funded by tobacco, encouraging journals to be biased against those investigators. I think they're in jeopardy of not receiving funds from these public health organizations for grants if they take a position opposed. So I don't think it's surprising to find that you don't have a lot of people speaking out against the concept of cigarette smoking being hazardous.
Well, you don't really have any who are totally unconnected with the tobacco industry, do
Well,
you?
there isn't anybody else left who has really looked at the situation. They're either public health or in some way or other they have conducted work for the tobacco industry, or they're in the group that has no opinion.
But if the public health people have an agenda, you would agree, would you not, that it is their mandate to try to protect the health of the public?
I said that is their bias, yes.
Okay. Now, you used the expression earlier about erring on the side of caution. Now, if I'm a smoker and I study the issue, and even if I only look at your point of view, maybe my product causes lung cancer, and maybe it doesn't. If I err on the side of caution, I quit smoking, right?
That's an individual decision, yes.
Okay. How many smokers in America quit every year?
I really don't know. I've seen a number that over time, some 50 million have quit, but per year I don't know.
Would you agree, does your common sense tell you, even though you may not have researched this or have definitive statistics on this, does your common sense tell you that the great majority of smokers who have quit for health reasons? That they figured if they continued to smoke, they would develop cancer or some other disease?
I don't know what the fraction would be, but certainly some percentage would quit for that reason. Others would quit because of the expense of purchasing cigarettes. Others may quit for from peer pressure, from pressure of children. I think there are all kinds of reasons people quit. I'm not able to quantitatively say what fraction relate to any particular reason.
Have you done any studies, or are you able to enlighten us at all on the number of smokers who would like to quit smoking but are unable to because they consider themselves to be addicted?
Again, I do not know what fraction, but I think it's one matter whether people say they want to quit and don't, and whether they really want to quit. They're two different things. And I think it would be very difficult to know the true feelings of an individual regarding smoking.
What are the products on the market that are designed to help a smoker who wants to quit but is unable to quit on his own, needs help?
What are the products?
Such as nicotine gum.
Well, it's my understanding there's a nicotine gum and a nicotine patch. There may be an aerosol. Those are the only products that I'm aware of.
Is nicotine addictive?
Well, whether or not it's addictive depends on your definition of addiction. I think any reasonable definition of addiction, I would come to the conclusion that nicotine is not addictive, in the sense that I think reasonable definitions of addiction must include the idea of euphoria, lack of ability to reason when under the influence of a substance. In other words, some sort of intoxication, and particularly lack of ability to make good judgments. These are all things that I think are reasonable in terms of a definition of addiction. Nicotine does not fit that kind of a definition for addiction. It's very much like caffeine. It has some pharmacological effects, but they're very mild relative to the kinds of things that I normally think of as addicting drugs or addicting substances.
Do you agree that there's a category of smokers who sincerely want to quit? They've made up their mind to quit. Their spouses, their kids, their good friends, their doctor tell them they are jeopardizing their health by continuing to smoke. They have tried to quit and they can't.
I'm not familiar with anyone like that.
Well, even though you're not familiar with anyone like that on a personal basis, is apparently what you're saying, would you agree that there is a category of people who fit that description?
Maybe. But, you know, there's also a category of people I'm sure that, let's say, bite their fingernails, who want to quit biting their fingernails, have been coerced and everything else to quit, and they continue to bite their fingernails. I don't consider that an addiction, but some people find it enormously difficult. So they say. And by their actions, it would appear so.
No one ever got lung cancer from biting their fingernails.
No, but I'm just pointing out to you that there certainly are habits that are very difficult to break, but I don't think that certainly doesn't mean that they're addicting.
Is it your position that any smoker, even if they smoked 3 packs a day for 30 years, if they sincerely make up their mind and they have a conviction that they want to quit and they're serious about it, that they can't quit on their own without any help?
I would believe that, yes.
And they can quit without any great psychological or physical difficulty once they've made that commitment to quit.
I don't know what's meant by any great psychological difficulty. Certainly, if it's a habit that you practice very frequently through a long period of time, then it's going to be difficult to stop, as would any habit. But is it impossible? No, I don't think so.
So what is Lorillard's strategy? What is your strategy as the president and CEO to replace all these quitting smokers?
We have no strategy to replace smokers.
Why do you advertise?
Try to get people to switch to our brand.
How successful is that?
Well, Newport is a growing brand, so in that sense it is successful. Some of our other brands are growing, others are declining. So obviously it varies by brand, but it's not simply advertising. It's the factor that determines whether or not a brand, people switch to it or not.
Do you have any statistics or research on how many non-smokers start with Newport or any other Lorillard brand?
Not that I'm aware of. But I have not reviewed every document that we have over time. I'm not aware of them.
You would agree, wouldn't you, even though you say that's not the intent of your advertising, that some non-smokers see your advertising, think about it, are attracted to it, I figure, you know, I'll try Newport. I'll try Kent. I'll try one of your other brands. Or do you take the position that never happened?
Well, I can't say it never happened, but I certainly don't have any evidence to say that it does.
Just like you don't have any evidence as to how many Marlboro smokers, as a result of your advertising, decide to stop smoking Marlboros and start smoking a Lorillard brand.
Yes, we do have evidence for that. We do have information that says so many people from each of the major competitive brands switch to a Newport in the last couple of years, something like that.
Is this research done by Lorillard?
Yes, sponsored by Lorillard, done by outside organizations.
Which outside organization does that?
I don't recall. I'm not even sure we've done it recently, but we've done it certainly in the past.
Do you think you have any figures or research, if you wanted to put your finger on how many Marlboro smokers within the last 3 years have quit smoking Marlboros and have started smoking a Lorillard brand?
That's not what I said. I said I think we have data that says of people who started smoking Newport, from which brands did they come? In other words, we would find some came from Marlboro, some came from Salem. I think we'd find very few came from Marlboro, but most of them would come from Salem and Cool, the other two major menthol brands. And as I generally recall, in a 2-year period, you might find somewhere between order of magnitude 8–10% of the smokers have switched. For a brand that's doing well, you would find fewer switching away from it. If there are a lot of new brands introduced, brand extensions, you'll find more switching at that point in time. So it depends on the point in time in history, what was being introduced in the marketplace. All of these things affect the switching rate.
Can you cite me to advertising in any industry other than the tobacco industry where the executives claim that we don't advertise for new customers? And obviously, if you're advertising Pontiacs, at least part of that advertising is directed to people that never owned a car before.
Object to the form of the question. You said new customers. You mean non-users of the product? Is that what you meant by
Correct.
new customers?
I mean, yeah, my understanding of advertising in general is buy our product. It doesn't matter to us whether you're switching from another product. Even we want people that have never used the product to start using it. So I'm simply saying, obviously you're saying that tobacco advertising is different. You don't advertise to people that have never used your product. You only want to get switchers. I'm asking you if you can cite me to any other industry or business in America that doesn't advertise to new customers.
I don't know what the purpose of other companies' advertising is and how they view it. My first judgment is that the alcoholic beverage industry, I don't think is advertising to new customers. Again, I think they're looking at the switching, established market. I think you would, I don't know what the number of new customers are in the tobacco industry, but I think you would go broke very quickly if you simply targeted that group. There aren't that many starting smoking every year. You could never have a brand on that basis. It's just not done. The advertising is to try to capture a share of the market that's out there.
How many people do start smoking each year?
I don't know, but it's a relatively small number. Its sales are constant as they have been for the last couple of years in this country. I'd say the people who quit are about equal to the people who start.
Would you agree that the great majority of new smokers are young smokers?
I think that has been published, yes.
You know, based on your knowledge of the tobacco industry, you would agree, would you not, that the great majority of smokers begin smoking certainly when they're under 21?
I don't recall any precise breakdown of age groups, but certainly there are a few people in the older age groups that begin to smoke for the first time.
You say there are a few?
Are there a few? I don't know, but they would be few in my estimation. And certainly in the younger age groups, 21 to 25, any of these age groups, you would find more than in the 60-plus age group. But quantitatively, I don't have those numbers in mind.
Have you noticed when you look at the broad spectrum of advertising, not only Lorillard advertising, but tobacco advertising, that in terms of the models used, they're all relatively young? Is that a fair generalization or unfair?
Object to the form of the question.
I think they seem to be, to me, in the 25 age group, yes, and older. We certainly use some models that are older than that, 40 age group.
What was a frank statement to cigarette smokers intended to accomplish?
What was it intended to accomplish? I didn't write it and I didn't publish it and I wasn't there, so I can't give you the intent of the authors. So in that sense, I can't answer your question. I can read what it says, but I can't tell you the intent.
When have you read it most recently?
Probably the last time I was deposed. Maybe 6 months ago.
What was the frank statement to cigarette smokers in response to, if you know?
I believe it was in response to some of the published scientific information at that time or just before that time. One was I think the Graham-Winder mouse skin painting and epidemiological study that had come out shortly before that.
You remember what year it was published?
Object to the form. What's it?
The frank statement?
Approximately, but not perfectly, no.
Approximately.
I think 53, 54.
Having read it, would you agree that one of the thrusts of the frank statement to cigarette smokers were that the tobacco industry was going to spend some money on scientific research?
That would be one of the thrusts, yes.
It's still the position of the tobacco industry today in 1997, isn't it, that more research is needed on the question of whether cigarette smoking causes cancer or other diseases?
That more research is needed? Yes, I think only research can resolve these issues.
Well, what has the research that's been conducted by the tobacco industry or funded by the tobacco industry from 1954 up until the present time answered the question of causation in any definitive way?
Well, the research supported by the tobacco industry, I think, has contributed significantly to the understanding of the diseases that we're talking about. Until we understand these diseases, I don't think there will be a resolution to the hypothesis that relates to whether or not cigarette smoking causes disease. These are very complicated diseases. The tobacco industry is not the only research, or not the only one supplying money for research on these diseases. It's a national commitment through the National Cancer Institute, Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. These are major, major programs, and we are, at this point in time, still unable to understand these diseases in terms of how they occur and what are the agents that cause them, or factors that cause them.
And for all you know, that'll be the situation 25 years from today.
Oh, I don't think so. I think that science is moving at a pace now that there will be an understanding of these diseases in the foreseeable future.
Do you concede that anything causes cancer?
I think you need to define for me what you're talking about. Are you defining, is that in humans or is that in animals?
In humans.
In humans? Yes, I think that it's been shown that certain occupational exposures cause cancer. For example, bis-chloromethylether is one that's recognized a number of years ago. Certainly radiation has been shown to cause tumors, particularly exposure among minors exposed to high levels of radiation. There have been a number of things, I think. Radiation from sunlight has been shown as a cause of cancer, skin cancer particularly.
Well, let me ask you a causation question.
And I would also answer that, and add to that, that there have been certain genetic defects that have been shown to be causes of cancer.
Let's say a man drinks a fifth of vodka every night for 10 years, and he gets cirrhosis of the liver. Would you be satisfied that the vodka caused the cirrhosis, or would you need to study the furniture in his house as possibly explaining the cirrhosis?
Furniture in his house?
Yes.
I would see no plausibility to the furniture in his house at this point. On the other hand, there may be other causes of cirrhosis of the liver, and certainly everyone who drinks alcohol does not get cirrhosis of the liver. So I'm not an expert on this subject, but I would certainly think there are other factors that could lead to cirrhosis of the liver.
What would you want to know with this guy? He drank a fifth of vodka every night for 10 years and had cirrhosis of the liver. What other information would you need before you would say, hey, obviously the vodka caused the cirrhosis? I accept that.
Well, I would want to, cirrhosis is, I guess, in my judgment, a response basically to toxins and detoxifying materials in the liver and overburdening that organ with respect to toxins. And I would want to know what other materials other than foods that this individual was ingesting over time. I would want to know if, and I don't know this, if cirrhosis of the liver is caused by any viral infection. I would want to look at all of the possible other agents that could bear on this.
What is the relationship between nicotine levels and tar levels?
What is the relationship?
Yes.
I think there's a very close correlation between tar and nicotine as measured by the Federal Trade Commission procedure that I described earlier. As a matter of fact, I did do a correlation between the two, and the correlation coefficient for the year, I believe 1994, maybe 1993, was 0.975, which is very near a perfect correlation, which is 1. So there is an extraordinarily high degree of correlation between the two.
You will recall that when you testified in front of Congress, when was that, in 94?
93, 94, 93, 94.
You were accused of lying on this subject.
By Mr. Waxman, yes, that's correct.
Okay, now, I assume you disagree that you lied.
Vehemently.
Okay. What didn't he understand? He was talking about an article apparently you wrote in 1981 where you said something different in that article than you said before Congress.
Yes, I recall. In the testimony before Congress, I described the high correlation between tar and nicotine. I described the general reduction in tar and nicotine of cigarettes over time, which is also part of the Surgeon General's report. Mr. Waxman came up with an article that I had written in 1981, which was an invited paper, which purpose of which was to describe some of the trends within the industry. And one of the trends that I described was the increasing number of low-tar, low-nicotine cigarettes. And further analysis of those cigarettes indicated that companies were using more flavorful tobaccos in these cigarettes. And by more flavorful, I mean basically tobaccos that have higher degrees of aroma and result in more acceptable end products. A byproduct of the tobaccos that have higher aromas and taste is that they have higher nicotine. And that was a indication in the paper that I had written that there was a tendency to use tobaccos with higher nicotine content in these very low tar, low nicotine cigarettes. Mr. Waxman tried to say that that was something that I was misrepresenting, that these cigarettes were high tar or high nicotine cigarettes, and that is untrue. They are low nicotine cigarettes in terms of the smoke. And I had an opportunity to try to explain to him on a second occasion that he had misinterpreted the information, that there was no correlation between the nicotine level of the tobacco and the nicotine level in smoke, and that smoke was being moderated by other factors. In other words, the filter, ventilation of the cigarette, length of the cigarette, amount of tobacco in the cigarette, and so forth. He didn't seem to want to accept that as a thesis, and handed me a paper by Neil Benowitz, as I recall, which described exactly the same thing, that there was no correlation between tobacco nicotine and the smoke yield of nicotine. And I read that back to him, saying, what you handed me is exactly what I've been telling you, and it comes from this individual. So I think it was a grand misunderstanding on his part or his staff's part. and somewhat of an unwillingness to accept the idea that there wasn't something submerged or not clear regarding what I had testified to. I think it was straightened out. At least to my satisfaction, I was able to explain in detail and point out a literature reference that support exactly what I was saying.
Who is Philip Hiltz?
Philip Hiltz?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't have a recollection of that name.
Well, let me help you. He had been for many years the chief tobacco writer for the New York Times.
Is this the reporter that had some comments to make to me at the end of the
I mean,
testimony?
you never read his book, Smokescreen?
I've seen it, yes. I have not read it in detail.
Well, did you read the few pages that relate to Alexander Spears?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's incorrect.
Well, but you will agree that he reached the same conclusion, that you lied to Congress. And very clearly says you lied to Congress. He doesn't mince words.
If you read his explanation, exactly the same statements that Mr. Waxman was making. He totally confuses nicotine and tobacco and nicotine and smoke.
But he called you a liar, didn't he?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And you're telling us, obviously, you're not a liar, and it was just confusing. Your position on nicotine and tar has always been consistent, correct?
That's correct.
Why didn't you sue him?
Why didn't I sue him?
Man, you're the president and CEO of Lorillard Tobacco Company. A man is a journalist, is writing a book called Smokescreen, where he very clearly impugns your integrity and reputation. Yes, why didn't you sue him?
Well, I don't particularly sue everyone who indicates something negative about me. I really didn't consider suing.
Just so it's clear, obviously I can't instruct the witness on this topic, but I object to this line of questioning as involving irrelevant, immaterial, and prejudicial hearsay. I don't think it makes a bit of difference what somebody says in a book. That's not a learned treatise.
Well, have you generally followed the media reporting on the tobacco industry in the last 10, 15 years? I assume you keep up with it.
Generally, yes.
Why not? Yeah, I know. I'm going to hand you the book by Philip J. Hiltz called Smokescreen, the subtitle being The Truth Behind the Tobacco Industry Cover-Up, and I'm going to read, yeah, let me mark the book as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.
Is that among the things that are being copied?
No, no.
Do you have a copy I can see? If you don't have an extra, then I'd like to see it before you show it to the witness.
Sure. Fine. I'm going to page 124. I'm starting now.
What do you want him to read?
I'm going to ask him about the middle of page 124, starting with higher nicotine levels.
All right, just a minute. And ending where? Oh, you're just asking about that paragraph?
Initially.
Okay.
We're on page 124, the middle of the page, where I believe Mr. Hiltz is quoting your article when he says, quote, higher nicotine levels can be achieved by decreasing oriental and the stem and tobacco sheet and increasing the burley and upper stalk positions of both flue-cured and burley tobacco, the paper said. And then Mr. Hiltz goes on to say, it was as clear a statement of how the company's work as has ever been put to paper. What could be his defense, referring to you, Dr. Spears? First of all, did he quote your paper correctly?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Of course, it was in the context of here are some of the possible ways that exist to achieve the result that I was reporting in this segment of the cigarette products, the very low tar nicotine products.
And then going down to the next paragraph, Hiltz says, as a result, he, Dr. Spears, wrote, current research is directed...
I don't see where... You down at the last paragraph?
No, the next...
Let me see.
Begins with the words, but no. Still on page 124.
Okay, but no, yes.
Okay. The second or third sentence in that paragraph is, as a result, he, Dr. Spears, wrote, current research is directed toward increasing the nicotine levels while maintaining or marginally reducing the tar levels. And then Filtz writes, he had written about intentionally separating tar and nicotine levels, but then boldly testified that it was not being done. Waxman was angry. As he released the copy of Spears' paper of 15 years before, he said, the tobacco companies have lied to us and said it is a criminal offense to try to mislead Congress. Is that accurate, what he's written there?
What you read is accurate,
Okay.
yes. Is it confused? Yes. And let me go back again. What I was talking about to Congress was tar and nicotine levels in the smoke, the amount of smoke from the cigarettes, particularly the amount of nicotine from the cigarette. I was not talking about the amount of nicotine in the tobacco. And this gentleman persists in exactly the same thing that Waxman was persisting in, confusing nicotine in tobacco with nicotine in smoke. And I was saying there are talking about low nicotine cigarette smoke. And I was pointing out there's no correlation between the nicotine level of tobacco and what's in the smoke. Secondarily, if you look at the data, these are rather marginal differences between the amount of nicotine in tobacco. I think it's like 2.2% in these cigarettes of the low tar, low nicotine variety, and roughly 2% with the average cigarette. So there wasn't any major difference in nicotine in tobacco. So he persists in the same thing that Waxman was persisting in, and that is confusing the issue between tobacco and cigarette smoke. Now, the other issue that he confuses is who was working on the idea of higher nicotine, lower tar. And that was the USDA. It wasn't the tobacco companies, as it was mentioned in that paper. The paper was referring to work being done by governmental organizations.
He refers to a Surgeon General's chart, which you apparently displayed during your testimony in front of Congress, or maybe it was there before you testified.
there was a chart that was taken from a Surgeon General report on sales-weighted tar nicotine over time. There were also charts that were produced by Dr. Kessler that talked about tar and nicotine sales-weighted delivery over time, but the time period was only 1982 to the present, as I recall.
Look at page 127, starting with the second paragraph, and follow along with me.
Starting with I was covering the hearing. Is that
Correct.
what you-
Okay, Mr. Hiltz says, referring to himself, I was covering the hearing and recall a rush of adrenaline when I saw the chart. It was clearly wrong. Amid the frustrating tangle of verbiage, here was a clear lie. The data showed a change, and nicotine proportions began to rise. The companies were trying to use the data over 40 years as a whole to mask the recent change, but they seem to have gone too far. Could he, referring to you, could he possibly have presented a fraudulent chart under oath to the committee? After Representative Kreidler's questioning, I waited until the break in the testimony, walked over to the witness table, and introduced myself to Dr. Spears. Have I read that accurately?
Yes, you have.
Okay. Now he goes on, Hiltz goes on to describe an exchange which took place between him and you.
Excuse me again, I object to this. This isn't questioning. Your counsel is just reading from a book. I think this is entirely improper and doesn't even involve questioning of the witness.
I'm laying the predicate for a question. Okay. Now, it says he introduced himself to you. I told him I noticed that the chart was not actually a copy of the Surgeon General's chart, that the company's chart showed nicotine levels continuing to drop relative to tar after 1982. I asked, that's wrong, isn't it? He, referring to you, he looked a bit startled. He quotes you, it goes down overall. Right, but at the end there, 1982 to 1990, that's wrong, isn't it? The company chart showed a 10% drop in nicotine from 1982 on, where the Surgeon General's actual data shows just less than a 10% increase in nicotine. And he quotes you as saying, yes, it's wrong. Did that exchange occur?
I don't recall ever suggesting to him that it was wrong.
And he puts quotes around it.
That's a misquote.
Well, are you saying you don't remember saying that, or are you saying that you definitely didn't say that?
Well, I'm saying I didn't say that.
So you're calling him, he's a liar if he puts quotes around it.
I believe he has misrepresented what I said, yes.
And then he goes on and
Would you like some explanation?
yeah, in a moment. I just want to get the last two lines where Hilt says, that seems important. How did that get wrong? And he quotes you as saying, I don't know. Is the I don't know out of your mouth accurate or inaccurate?
Inaccurate.
Okay, now you wanted to explain.
There were a number of charts that were presented to the committee. As I indicated, Kessler presented charts to the committee, and his charts were basically 1982 maybe to 1990. I don't remember the exact year that it stopped. The Surgeon General had published a chart which ended, I believe, in the late 1980s. What I had presented to them was simply an attempt to replicate the chart in the Surgeon General's report and to calculate some additional points with new data that were not included there. When this issue came up, it was obvious that there was a major disagreement between what Kessler had provided and what I had provided for the period 82 forward. His data suggested there was an independent increase of nicotine and tar was either going down or no trend. There have been conversations with Kessler about this data. He published it again in some of the FDA rulemaking. He has responded to that as again that he is erroneous. The data does not suggest what his charts were suggesting. Nicotine is not going up independent of tar. In fact, there is very little trend in this period. They're both relatively flat. Fluctuations are very small. If you carry it to, I think, 1994, which is the last data that I have, you see again a little downward tick in both tar and nicotine in that last year. So there isn't really much of anything going on in this period. Now, the 1982 point is a low point for both tar and nicotine in these charts. And if you choose that point, you can say it's gone up since then, but that's relying on one single point. We are in disagreement with what Kessler's organization has put together as a trend. It's not supported by the data. We've asked for their calculations, have not received them, as to how they made these calculations. Done everything that I know to do to verify what I said as being correct, and I believe it's correct. And as I say, if you add more data points that have come along recently, it continues to be so. There's no upward trend in nicotine.
Do you agree that at least the Surgeon General's chart that was before you at the congressional hearings showed a 10% increase in nicotine between 1982 and 1990?
If you base it on the 1982 point, yes, but you can almost make that statement 82 to 83. It's one very low point, and that was part of my chart.
Have you ever read these pages before?
I don't know. I read it, kind of discussed a long time when it first came out, about a reporter who could get things this confused and write about it.
So did you read the whole book?
No, I have not read the whole book.
But you did read obviously someone brought that to your attention.
Brought it to my attention.
A lot of people brought it to your attention.
Not a lot,
okay.
Several.
And as a result of it being brought to your attention, where a New York Times reporter is calling you in a book, he's not whispering it, he's calling it you in a book, and he's not talking about a misunderstanding. From his point of view, you lied.
Object to the form of the question. Move to strike everything but the question.
That's a fair reading of these 4 pages to the reader, that Hiltz is calling you a liar.
That's what he said.
Okay.
Mr. Rosenbach, when you're through with this topic, I'd like to take a break.
A couple of minutes. Very, very clear. Now, in these pages, Hiltz is obviously referring to a personal, direct conversation he had with you during a break in your testimony before Congress. Did you have a conversation with Phil?
I don't know. I do recall a reporter coming up to me after the testimony when I was getting ready to leave and asked me a question. And I said something to the effect, this is a very complicated issue, and I don't have time to fully respond to you, but what I presented is correct. Mr. Waxman is wrong in what he has said, and I have presented as clearly as I know how to present it.
Do you remember the discussion? But you don't remember if that reporter was Philip Hill?
I don't know.
You don't remember what paper he was with?
No.
Okay. Have you read the cigarette papers?
Again, anything that was pointed out to me I read. I have not read the whole thing.
Well, what does the cigarette papers pertain to?
I don't remember the details of cigarette paper.
Did you read Ashes to Ashes?
Same response. No, I have not read it, but I've read pieces of it.
Let's take a break.
Going off the record, 10:30. Returning to the record, 10:57. Thank you.
Has Lorillard sued the United States Environmental Protection Agency?
No, they have not.
Were you asked to join in that lawsuit and declined, or you were never asked?
I don't really know whether we were asked, but we have certainly been supportive of the lawsuit.
What is the purpose of the lawsuit as far as your understanding?
Object to the form of the question as possibly calling for discussion of attorney-client privilege material, and to the extent that your answer would involve anything concerning communications with counsel, I'd have to instruct you not to answer.
That is the only information I have, that which I've obtained from counsel.
Have you read the report of the Environmental Protection Agency?
Yes, I have.
And you're critical of it?
Not every word, but I disagree with the conclusions, yes.
Based on what?
Based on my analysis of the report. Some of the procedures that were used in arriving at the conclusion.
Well, the report, one of the conclusions of the report was that secondhand smoke is a Class A carcinogen. Is that one of the conclusions you disagree with?
Yes, it is.
Does secondhand smoke or involuntary smoke cause cancer or any other disease in non-smokers?
There's nothing in that report or the literature that would lead me to that conclusion.
So it's your position that secondhand smoke does not cause any disease in non-smokers?
No, I can't make that statement. That would be kind of proving the negative. One can only come to the conclusion that there is no evidence really supporting that postulate that cigarettes, environmental tobacco smoke causes cancer, in this case that we're talking about.
Okay, on the issue of causation, explain to me how your position differs, if it does, with respect to active smoking and with respect to secondhand smoke.
All right, with respect to the epidemiology, the association in mainstream smoking is much more significant and much stronger in terms of the odds ratio than it is with the environmental tobacco smoke. As a matter of fact, with environmental tobacco smoke, none of the studies reach statistical significance. There are those studies which show a protective effect, if you want to interpret it that way, by environmental tobacco smoke and cancer. The so-called meta-analysis produces a number which is a marginal increase, and that's the only way statistical significance of sorts has been reached in that report by the EPA. So I find the epidemiological evidence vastly different. Really no association of any consequence in the case of the environmental tobacco smoke. Secondarily, there are clear evidence of confounders being operative in the epidemiological studies, where the only measure of amounts of exposure is being married to a smoker over time. That's certainly not a direct measure of dose. And there are numerous confounders, particularly dietary confounders, that are included with that kind of a surrogate for dose. People's diets that live together are very similar, and the diets, I think, in smoking, where there is a smoker in the household, are different from those where there are no smokers. The other major problem is with bias in terms of individuals reporting that they're non-smokers and they're actually smokers. This affects the calculations. If you take very conservative view of confounders and bias, I find no association in the epidemiological studies. So there's nothing in the epidemiological studies relating to environmental tobacco smoke that would suggest that there is a relationship. Absent any potential statistical correlation, there's no reason to speculate that environmental tobacco smoke is a cause. Secondarily, there's nothing plausible about the levels of exposure and disease. The levels of exposure are extraordinarily low. EPA report used some very old data. New data has indicated exposure levels are not nearly as significant as they were reporting them to be, or included in their calculations. The whole idea of plausibility depends on one thing, and that is if you conclude that mainstream smoking is a carcinogen, as EPA did, then the only way you can get to that possible conclusion on environmental tobacco smoke is that if mainstream smoke is, then so is environmental tobacco smoke. Certainly the evidence does not support it.
So your answer to the question, does secondhand smoke cause disease in non-smokers? Your answer is there is absolutely not a shred of evidence to support that. Is that correct?
Not a shred of evidence. I wouldn't say there's not a shred. I'm saying there, if you interpret that evidence, it certainly is not supportive of that concept.
There's no evidence that you consider to be scientifically impressive or impressive from the standpoint of epidemiology to support the conclusion that secondhand smoke causes disease.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know Bennett LeBeau?
I don't believe I've ever met him. I know who he is.
Okay. He owns another tobacco company, Lake, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, he says that in recent days he has said that cigarette smoking causes cancer. You've never spoken to him about how he reached that conclusion?
No, I have not.
When did bans on smoking in buildings become in vogue?
I believe it started a year or two before the EPA report.
What is the year of the EPA report?
I don't recall the exact date, but I would say probably about 7, 8 years ago.
Now, was there ever a Surgeon General's report that dealt, if not exclusively, primarily with the subject of secondhand smoke?
Yes, there was.
And what year was that?
I believe it was 86.
Would you agree that the conclusions reached in that Surgeon General's report were that second-hand smoke does in fact cause disease to non-smokers, specifically lung cancer?
I don't remember the exact conclusions in that report. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. Whether they reached that conclusion or whether it was a preliminary conclusion on that part, I don't recall.
What has been the policy of Lorillard, for example, if a city council or a governmental agency or the United States Defense Department is considering banning smoking in their buildings?
Object to the form of the question. Compound.
Depends on what the situation is, but basically to provide accurate testimony or data and to suggest accommodation between smokers and non-smokers.
I mean, is it fair to say that Lorillard has consistently fought bans on smoking, whether it be in restaurants or in office buildings or in governmental buildings? Generally speaking, you have fought those kinds of bans.
We have advocated for reasonable policy, and we've advocated the idea that a business owner should have the prerogative of setting policies regarding their business.
And you advocate those policies through who? Do you have a separate firm? Does the Tobacco Institute take care of that for you?
On occasion, where it's been a local matter where Lorillard is operated, we have had testimony by our employees, someone in our organization. We provide data from people in our organization. Other than that, I don't recall an instance where we have been an advocate one way or the other.
From yesterday's Frank statement. You need to mark it. Yeah, mark it as an exhibit to this deposition as well.
Is this an actual photocopy of the Frank statement, or is this that retyped?
Retyped.
We have the actual one here, but it's very small.
What do I have? The copy that you gave me, is that a copy of the statement, or is that a copy of the retyped?
That's the initial statement. That's the only one I read.
Let me see.
So just follow your policy of generally reading this during deposition.
You want me to read this?
Yeah, well,
The whole thing?
glance at it. Because I'm going to ask you generically if there's anything in there that today you would disagree with.
And just for clarification with respect to the document, Mr. Rosenblatt, as I understand it, it's your representation that apart from any spelling errors, that is word for word identical to the Frank statement itself.
That is correct. I have some questions about the first column. So,
Okay.
so let me start there. Number 3, where the Frank statement says that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer. Do you agree with that statement?
That there is no proof?
That cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer.
Just again for clarification, looking at a copy of the Frank statement itself, paragraph 3 doesn't say anything about lung cancer.
I agree with you, but it's obvious from the context that when it says that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes, they are talking about, and I'm sure Dr. Spears will agree with me, that from the context it's obvious what is meant by that is that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer. And I'm simply asking you at this point, do you agree with the statement that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer?
I object to the form of the question unless you clarify whether you're asking him if he agrees with that as of today or if he agrees that that was an accurate statement when it was made.
I am asking him whether he agrees with that today.
I would not write the statement in these terms today. I would indicate that there is data, but not adequate data to conclude that cigarette smoking is a cause of cancer.
Well, isn't it? I understand that. Your wording
But
would be different.
If
but
no proof means no data, that wouldn't be correct.
Okay. But you have taken the position under oath many times in the past, substantially, although you may not have used precisely these words. Your position, as you have expressed it, is that it has not been scientifically proven that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer.
Correct. And at the same time, it's not proven that it doesn't cause.
And that's your position today.
That's correct.
Okay. As a president and CEO of Lorillard, is your primary responsibility to your stockholders?
Well, that's one responsibility.
But I mean, pick your number one. I mean, is it to your stockholders, to your customers, to your employees?
Well, I'm not sure I have one. I think I have responsibility to the shareholders, responsibility to the employees, responsibility to customers, responsibility to our vendors, our employees. Yes, a whole community of individuals, to the consuming public in general in terms of our customers.
You don't have a responsibility to someone who is a non-smoker and who thinks your product causes disease and death. You don't have responsibility to that person, do you?
No, I think we have responsibility to the community in general, and that would include those individuals.
Now, going down the first column, after number 4, where a frank statement to cigarette smokers says We accept an interest in people's health as a basic responsibility paramount to every other consideration in our business. Do you agree with that statement today?
As it would relate to the use of the product, yes. I wouldn't agree with it in any other sense, no.
But you're really not much help to the consumer in that respect, are you? When your bottom line is maybe it does cause disease and maybe it doesn't cause disease, because that's really what your bottom line is on the issue of cigarette smoking and health, isn't it?
Well, and at the same time, we're carrying warning notices to the consumer for them to make their own judgment, yes.
Now, the next statement says, we believe the products we make are not injurious to health. Do you agree with that statement today?
I think that's a very difficult statement to make. A positive or a negative cannot be proven in this business. To say that any product, whether it's tobacco product or otherwise, is not injurious can only be in the context as the evidence does not support it being injurious.
Are you comfortable with that statement, that the evidence does not support the conclusion that our products, Lorillard's products, are
injurious?
Injurious.
Yes, I am.
Okay. The last statement under column 1 is, we always have and always will cooperate closely with those whose task it is to safeguard the public health. Do you agree with that statement?
I would certainly cooperate with respect to these folks in the sense of providing information and conducting research and making the results available. Yes.
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency certainly has the task of safeguarding the public health, and not only are you not cooperating with them, but you are knocking their conclusions at every opportunity, and you support the lawsuit against them by other tobacco companies.
Well, to say that I'm cooperating doesn't mean that I have to accept everything that they do that's erroneous in my judgment.
Well, in what way have you cooperated with, let's say, the Surgeon General over the years?
The Surgeon General, as I recall, Lorillard provided information to the Surgeon General's committee prior to the first Surgeon General's report. We have certainly cooperated.
You mean the one in 64?
In 64. We have cooperated through not the Surgeon General, although the Assistant Surgeon General, as I recall, was one of the early participants in what became known as the Tobacco Working Group under the National Cancer Institute. I personally served with that organization and cooperated with it. We've cooperated with the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. We have tried to be cooperative in that sense with anyone who sought our cooperation and where we had information to provide.
Does Lorillard conduct in-house research itself on the subject of smoking and health?
That's a very broad subject from a scientific research point of view. I would say yes, but qualify the definition is important, exactly what the definition is.
Does Lorillard conduct any research in-house specifically which addresses the question, do your products cause cancer in humans?
I think much of what we do is relevant to that question, or have done in the past, yes. At least the research was directed that area. Much of it has been conducted external to our organization.
Have any of your studies implicated tobacco in any way as being a risk factor for any disease?
No, that would be an epidemiological study. We've not conducted epidemiological studies.
You're not a smoker, are you?
Not currently.
When'd you quit?
1977.
So you haven't smoked a cigarette in 20 years?
No, I've occasionally smoked cigarettes, yes.
But you certainly haven't smoked a half a pack in any given day in the last 20 years, or have you?
No, I've said occasionally.
Yeah. I just wanted to get your definition of occasionally. But you've considered yourself essentially a non-smoker since 77.
That's correct.
How heavy of a smoker were you before 77?
No, about a pack a day.
You quit smoking because you had a heart attack?
That's correct.
So in your case, you quit smoking for health reasons?
Yes, a unique health reason, but yes, a health reason.
Did you have any difficulty quitting?
No.
When you were a smoker, did you generally smoke the first cigarette within a few minutes after arising? Did you have a pattern in that regard?
Yes, I smoked shortly after I was awake.
And when you quit smoking, did you the next morning, did you miss the cigarette that you've been doing for years before?
Well, I thought it would be difficult. My thought process was that this would be a very difficult task, and it was not. Once I made up my mind to do it.
Does the technology exist where if a tobacco company decided to add nicotine to its product, it could do so?
Well, I think the technology would exist, yes.
Are you through with this document, Mr. Rosen?
Yes.
Came from over here.
Sorry.
Can you conceive of any experiment, research, that would satisfy you and cause you to say that, yes, that experience proves to me that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer?
Can I conceive of an experiment? I don't know that I can conceive of a single experiment. I can certainly conceive of a number of experiments. One experiment that would be important is production of human-type lung tumors in animals. Lung tumors, I'm speaking of malignant lung tumors. Another would be an in-depth understanding of the mechanism of the disease and how tobacco smoke or its components would play a role in that mechanism. Those are the critical missing areas in terms of determining whether cigarette smoking is causative in the disease.
How come those studies haven't been done?
Animal experiments have been done, and they have not produced tumors in animals of the type in human lung cancer. This is one of the pieces of information that I would take as not supporting the idea that cigarette smoking is a cause of lung cancer. So that experiment has been done. The other one relating to the mechanism and understanding of cancer, this is something that everybody's been working on, or not everyone, but scientists have been working on for years. They're beginning to understand in more depth the cellular reactions and the cellular processes that are ongoing, the role that certain genes play is beginning to be understood, but it's far from complete at this juncture.
What is the Center for Indoor Air Research?
It's an organization that is devoted to sponsoring research that relates to indoor air quality, with the exceptions of asbestos in indoor air and radiation in indoor air.
Is it correct that the data collected by the Center for Indoor Air Research is frequently used by the tobacco industry to oppose bans on smoking?
I don't recall that, no. What I recall is investigators who've been funded by the Center for Indoor Air producing results and publishing the results, and I think at least one of them has testified before an OSHA committee, OSHA hearing, excuse me.
At one time, you were the chairman of the board of the Center for Indoor Air Research.
That's correct.
During what time frame was that?
I can't remember the exact dates, but I would say late 80s to a couple of years ago, so about 94.
You are aware, are you not, that in 1994, I believe it was February, 6 former U.S. Surgeon Generals testified before Congress to support a bill banning smoking in public buildings?
I don't remember that specific instance, but I do remember former Surgeon Generals testifying, but I don't remember the subject.
Do you remember that a group of former Surgeon Generals testified on that subject, supporting a bill banning?
Yeah, I do remember a media event that involved the former Surgeon Generals, but I don't remember the details.
Okay. And obviously some of these former Surgeon Generals were appointed by Democratic presidents, some by Republican presidents.
They would have been
Sure.
if they were representative, yes.
Okay. Why do you think it is that they don't understand what you've told us, that there's really no evidence to support the proposition that secondhand smoke causes disease in non-smokers?
Well, I can't speak to their reasoning other than what they've said. And I'm sure you're aware that there have been other people who have looked at the same data that are in government. Particularly, I'm thinking of the Congressional Research Service, who've looked at the EPA report and not reached the same conclusions as the EPA regarding environmental tobacco smoke and whether or not it's been proven as a cause of lung cancer, for example. So that there's certainly a lot of controversy in the scientific community and people who have studied this issue, and I would have hoped that Surgeon Generals would take a scientific view of the data. They may be taking a political view of the data.
But why would they do that? What's in it for them? They're retired.
Well, what's in it if you are an avid anti-smoker and opposed to smoking and have concluded that smoking is a health hazard, then this potentially is a useful tool to prohibit smoking. That is, if you assert that environmental tobacco smoke is a health hazard, then this provides a reason for regulating smoking, and presumably a regulation of smoking in terms of places that you can smoke would reduce smoking.
And it's your judgment that the 1986 Surgeon General's report and the report of the United States Environmental Protection Agency reflect that kind of an agenda? That's what motivated the conclusions? Because certainly they're smart enough to know, to recognize what you're telling us.
Well, I think, in my mind, without question, some of the Surgeon Generals had a political agenda. Certainly Everett Koop had political agendas. He still does, with respect to smoking.
Well, if someone who is a physician sincerely believes that cigarette smoking causes disease in the interest of public health, it would be a great thing if people quit smoking and non-smokers weren't subjected to secondhand smoke. That's a political agenda? Or isn't that a health agenda, a good health agenda?
Well, you might call the first proposition a health agenda with respect to smoking, but you can also look at the position on environmental tobacco smoke as simply a position to expedite their former or their other position on mainstream smoking.
Your father was a smoker and he died of lung cancer, correct?
That's correct.
And for all you know, the cause of his death was what you sell billions of every year.
I don't know that to be the case.
It could be, maybe yes, maybe no. You just don't know.
That's correct.
Did your father ever tell you that you shouldn't smoke?
No.
For how many years did your father smoke?
Well, he smoked from the time that I remember until his death.
Long time.
Yes. It would be, I think I was born when he was about 40 years old, so I guess I would have remembered maybe 20 years or so. 25 years, 20 years.
How heavy a smoker was he?
Pack a day, a couple packs. Maybe I don't think I ever counted how many cigarettes he smoked.
Well, other than the tobacco, him being a smoker, is there any other, I mean, was he in an industry? Did he work in an industry where you think maybe as an occupational hazard that could have been a cause?
I think there are potentially many causes.
I understand that. But what did your father do for a living?
He was a physician. And we lived in Pittsburgh or near Pittsburgh in the soft coal mining region. you want to speculate, there were coke ovens in the area, so there were heavy emissions in terms of air quality in those days. You can make all kinds of speculation, but they are just speculation. It's not known the cause of this disease.
You don't think your father ever recommended to any of his patients that they take up smoking?
I have no idea what he recommended to his patients.
Well, sure you do, because your
No, I
father.
don't.
Your
Objection, you're arguing with the
Okay.
witness.
I mean, sure you do, because your father was an intelligent man and he was a physician. Can you conceive that your father would have recommended to a non-smoker that he start smoking?
I have no idea. I wasn't present.
Can you conceive of any responsible physician today telling a patient, you know, I recommend you take up smoking?
I can certainly think of some risk factors that are lowered among smokers. Whether or not a physician would recommend that is something I can't say, but some of the dementia diseases are lower among smokers than they are general population. Certain inflammation of the bowel, diseases of the bowel are lower among smokers. So I'm not sure that's a reason to make a recommendation, but I can't put myself in the place of these physicians.
I just got a note, so I guess we're just about at the end.
Going off the record, 11:37.
Do you want to take a